I'd like you to imagine the following scene. Young rabbi, about 26 years old, standing at 6'4", very stately, very aware of his own presence. Had he not been born to a Jewish family in Danville, Virginia, he probably would have been a basketball player. And he is officiating at a graveside service. One of his first. It's a rainy day. And so there's a lot of mud. And as he's officiating, his foot falters, and he slips, and he falls into the burial plot. But he doesn't lose his footing, because as I said, very athletic, very stately. So he's standing in the burial plot, continuing to run the service. Slowly but surely, one by one, each one of the family members on that rainy day in Houston somehow makes his or her way into the burial plot with him. They say, "Rabbi, we've never heard of this ritual before." But sure. Story, that's going to happen. I'll just raise my voice. When my father-in-law told me that story about his early rabbinate, the first thing I thought about was, oh, that's funny. That's kind of funny. It's a funny scene. The second thing I thought about is, oh, you know what, maybe I shouldn't laugh at that because there's a real sincerity and misunderstanding. But now, as I think about the question of ritual, I actually look to that as a metaphor. For many Jews today, this story epitomizes what ritual is. Some weird, mysterious thing I never would have thought of myself, doesn't seem to speak to my authentic self in any sort of real way, but the rabbi says I should do it, so I'll do it. And for many Jews in the next generation, they say, well, we don't care if the rabbi says we should do it. We're not doing it. So there's something off about our ritual selves today. We've spoken thus far about what it means to be a Jew, how you know you're a Jew, what Jews eat, pumpernickel bread or white bread. We've spoken a bit about how you become a Jew, or perhaps the poorest boundary, how you leave or don't leave. We've spoken a bit about the content of what it means to be a Jew in the universalistic sense. I want to talk about the content of being a Jew in a very particularistic sense. That content. Let me be very clear about this. When I talk about religion, what I mean is the cultural system of behaviors, practices, worldviews, sacred texts, holy places, ethics, and societal organization that relate humanity to an order of existence. There's a lot in there. And we all do it different ways. So I want to be clear that this talk is not about one group's ritual or another group's ritual, one group's definition of why ritual or another's, or how the ritual is done or not done. This is about religious performance. And it isn't just about religious performance, because this affects many other realms of ritual. There's cultural ritual performance, Jewish cultural ritual performance. Tomorrow evening, when we recite Havdalah together at the end of Shabbat, we'll be doing a Jewish ritual performance that is classically, traditionally religious, but we'll probably sing Debbie Friedman's tune. There's some cultural ritual. How many people have been here for more than one summer? Coming to HartmanSummer is your ritual. And it isn't just cultural Jewish rituals, it's just your human ritual. How many people took a jog this morning? To the rest of you, good luck on the tiyul. How many people drank a cup of coffee this morning? That's a ritual. Rituals are everywhere because we're embodied. Performance is everywhere. I want to talk specifically about religious ritual, even though what I'm going to talk about relates to those other forms of ritual. And for many people, there's actually a real Venn diagram between those three. And sometimes the Venn diagram is completely overlapping, which is to say my religious ritual is singing Debbie Friedman, whether it's Havdalah or not. For some people, they don't overlap at all. I want to talk about religious ritual for two reasons. One, I want to imagine what happened when that family went to the next funeral. I can't believe no one's going into the burial plot. I can't believe they only put 1 foot in. I can't. Did you see how that person slipped in there? They don't understand this at all. We fight about ritual. Ritual has become fundamentalist. Identity politics. And by the way, I'm not just talking about religious ritual. I'm also talking about Jewish cultural ritual. Do you support Israel this way or do you support Israel that way? What do you mean you've never been to Israel? Oh, you're going on birthright? Right? It's everywhere. And the second issue is back to that question of alienation. It's not just alienation, this ritual doesn't mean much to me. It's the whole notion is strange. I am an autonomous individual. That autonomy deserves protection. My individuality is sacred and dignified. What do you mean that I'm going to inherit an activity that I either opt into, feel obligated by, other people expect me to be interested in? What does that even mean? What does ritual have for the autonomous individual today? And it's got to have something, because all three realms of those ritual that we mentioned, we're all involved in one of them. We love ritual in one way or another. Why? Or why should we is actually the question that I want to ask. So I want to explore the relationship between ritual and authenticity. My real self and what I do. And I want to do that in the following 2 moves. The first move is I want to talk a bit about 2 different options for what the relationship between ritual and authenticity looks like in Jewish thinking over the last 2,000 years, but primarily philosophical. So Middle Ages to, I'm not going super contemporary, but Middle Ages to 18th, beginning of 19th century. And then I want to talk about an additional model for the relationship between ritual and the authentic self, and a model that I think is helpful. And make no mistake, this is not my argument for saying you should keep this ritual or that ritual. I have my own reasons for keeping ritual. I'm sure those who decide to keep this ritual or that have their own reasons for yes, for no, for how. That's not what I'm doing here. What I'm doing is I'm trying to give us a lens for how we look at ritual and what it can do as opposed to what it is doing in the 21st century. So that when you go to the Kotel, if you choose to go on Monday, the ritual is meaningful beyond the politics. Good? Okay. Let's start with Adam Seligman. Adam Seligman is a sociologist who unsurprisingly finds himself in a department of religion. And he came up with a distinction that really has made an impression upon me. A distinction that he calls the ritual self versus the sincere self. Let's take a look at number 1 together. We develop 4 central points in the following chapters. This is the beginning of a book. First, we claim that ritual creates the subjunctive, an as-if or could-be universe. It is this very creative act that makes our shared social world possible. Creating a shared subjunctive, we will argue, recognizes the inherent ambiguity built into social life and its relationships, including our relations with the natural world. The formality, reiteration, and constraint of ritual, we will argue, all necessary aspects of the shared creation. You want to think about the as-if, you want to think about what you're creating when you're in ritual, just think about the Passover Seder. As if you left Egypt. Think about Holocaust Remembrance Day, where people will perhaps hold a sheet of paper with someone's information on it, a survivor or a victim, and they're supposed to inhabit those shoes for a moment. There's something about ritual that invites us to perform something that isn't really, but we're creating it. I'm standing in front of the kotel and I'm imagining myself connected to something. Jewish history, perhaps a temple, perhaps a past, perhaps a future, perhaps a people, many of whom I don't know. It's as if I'm creating it. It's in my head. I don't know if it's really there. It's a wall. But it's something else that I've built. Second, we claim that these aspects of a shared as if created through ritual pervade many realms of human endeavor. Ritual is not restricted to the realm we moderns define as religious, as we mentioned before, or even to secular ritual. Ritual and ritualistic behavior are not so much events as our ways of negotiating our very existence in the world. To be sure, we can find such ritual behaviors in churches, mosques, synagogues, and so on. But we can also find them in public performances, at concerts, in the theater, and crucially in more quotidian enactments of civility and politeness among strangers and even intimates. Whenever the expressions please and thank you are used, when we ask a casual acquaintance, how are you? Both knowing in advance that we do not really expect an honest answer, which could be disastrous, we are enacting a crucial ritual for the maintenance of our shared social world. Try this, as I did this morning. I walked up to the guard at the gate and I said, good morning. He said, good morning. And I said, how are you? And he said, thank you. How are you? Thank you. How come you're not telling me how you are? Because you don't care. It's a ritual. It's something we do, not his ritual. Our third substantive point is that ritual modes of behavior can be usefully contrasted to what we term sincere forms of approaching the world. Sincere views are focused not on the creation of an as-if or a shared subjunctive universe of human being in the world. Instead, they project an as-is vision of what often becomes a totalistic, unambiguous vision of reality as it really is. The tropes of sincerity are pervasively within us, in both our personal and our shared social world. They appear in the arrogances of what we term fundamentalist religious beliefs. They are present in our overwhelming concern with authenticity, with individual choice, with the belief that if we can only get at the core, the fount, the unalterable and inimitable heart of what we really feel or really think, then all will be well. If not with the world, then at least with ourselves. The tensions between ritual and sincerity is not new, but pervasive in human cultures. Now I'm leaving out number 4 on purpose. The sincere self, he argues, is what we call in our family how you think you feel about how you think you feel. It's the inside of you. It's what's real for you. It's what you would be doing if you thought there was nothing you had to do. That's your real self. That's your sincere self. Your ritual self, he says, is something else. It's outside of you. By taking these two apart, he's going to give us an opportunity to do something. He's going to give us an opportunity to play with the question of what's actually the relationship between your inner life and your outer life, and not assuming necessarily that one flows from the other. But the truth is that classically, Jewish thinkers have discussed that there actually is a sort of symbiotic relationship between performance and the authentic self. And that symbiotic relationship usually is really about producing a certain authenticity or reflecting a certain authenticity. So for instance, in number 2, Maimonides, in his Guide for the Perplexed, his philosophical work, basically trying to fight against those who would see Jewish ritual as illogical or lacking logic because that would make it more divine and not subject to human reason. Well, Maimonides disagrees because he's a rationalist, because he's Aristotelian. Every one of the 613 precepts serves to inculcate some truth, he says, to remove some erroneous opinion, to establish proper relations in society, to diminish evil, to train in good manners, to warn against bad habits. All this depends on three things: opinions, morals, and social conduct, etc. What is the point of the performance? The performance is pedagogical. It's trying to teach you something. It's trying to induct you into something. So when I commemorate the Shabbat, I don't commemorate the Shabbat because I believe in it. Commemorating the Shabbat is supposed to teach me that God created the world. And we'll take a more cultural ritual, which for some may be in that Venn diagram in the middle between religious and cultural. Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. You take your 8-year-old to Holocaust Remembrance Day, to a commemorative event in the evening. That child is not there performing that ritual because she feels something. That child is there because you hope that she will feel something. In other words, her authentic self, you hope, is going to be impacted by the performance. That's what you'd like to see. And of course, it's a loop, because you keep taking her 8, 9, 10, 11. You hope that by the time she's 19, she's there because she does feel something, right? So what happens is it starts as the ritual teaching you something about yourself, shaping yourself, and then the loop continues that the ritual becomes an expression of who you are. Now I have a big problem, which is, if you know who you are, what do you need the ritual for? If you know it, let's say your daughter feels it. Oh no, Mom, I'm not going to a Holocaust Remembrance Day evening. I remember. I'm not going. Why go? You need to reinforce it. There's a pretty, I would say, Nebuch view of ritual. I'm doing something because I need to reinforce something in myself. I'm not mature enough. Okay, we're embodied people, so we need it. There's something to it, but I'm not inspired by the ritual aspect. The ritual aspect is in service of something else. And by the way, you have mystics who do this as well, which is to say, take a look at number 3. The Baal Shem Tov, founder of Hasidism in Ukraine, early 18th century. The first book that was published about his teachings 30 years after he died, the Keter Shem Tov, discusses the relationship between what the Hasidim call dveikut, communion with God, and mitzvot, and ritual activity. As for the matter of dveikut, it is written here, some hold that the sign that you have achieved dveikut is when you utter a single word during prayer and linger over it for a long time, because you are unable to separate yourself from it as a result of your dveikut. So actually, the ritual is not totally clear, but it's an expression of what you already are inside, right? So it's the external expression of what you already are. Or perhaps, as we continue, others say dveikut is achieved when you perform a mitzvah or study Torah in a way that turns your body into a seat for your nefesh, for your soul. We're about to say the word soul in a lot of different ways, and you can all ask Shaul Magid or Biti Ro'i, who are very familiar with Kabbalah, to explain to you what the difference between these things are. And the nefesh into one for the ruach, and the ruach into one for the neshama, and the neshama becomes a seat to the light of the Shekhinah, God's presence, etc., etc. So there it seems that the ritual actually helps you achieve some sort of communion. But you see the loop. What really matters is the dveikut. What really matters is the communion. What really matters is what's happening inside. So these are very internally motivated understandings of ritual, which is to say that the ritual will reinforce a certain internal type, will teach you how to be and how to think and how to feel, or will be an expression of how you think or how you feel, which is fine, but again, the performance then becomes secondary. Another way of thinking about the relationship between the authentic self and the performance was actually forget about the mutual reinforcement for a minute. They're on separate tracks. They're on separate tracks, and we still prefer the inner life. We still prefer working on the inner self. And that was the movement of Musar. The Musar movement, a 19th century Lithuanian movement, ethical, educational, cultural. The idea was basically working on oneself. And the Musar movement decoupled the inner self and the outer self. Because they said it doesn't matter what Jewish ritual performance you're doing. That may not make you a nicer person, or a kinder person, or a better person. Do you know how you work on your ritual self? On your internal self, your authentic self? Here, I have a book for you that talks about what it means to give other people respect, what it means to be patient, what it means to be humble. Learn this book. Talk about these issues. Don't think that you're going to become a better person by doing mitzvot, by doing Jewish ritual. Become a better person. Buy a self-help book. You're in the wrong section of Barnes & Noble. Or you're on the wrong section of your Kindle. Does anybody go to Barnes & Noble anymore? I don't know. You do? Okay, good. You and me both, by the way. It's a great place for my kid to pull things off the shelves. You're looking in the wrong place. And so Shaul Magid suggests, well, actually, this is the seeds of secularism. In number 4, Charles Taylor, the philosopher, begins his sources of the self with the following assertion: selfhood and the good, or in another way, selfhood and morality, turns out to be inextricably intertwined themes. Tying theories of modern selfhood to morality, not only how we should act, but as important, that's a teacher's favorite sound, the sound of the page turning. Thank you. But as important, the sources we draw from in determining how we should act and how they are to be interpreted stand at the center of my inquiry in regards to what I will call modern Musar, better known as the Musar movement, initiated by Israel Salanter in the 19th century, Eastern and Central Europe. I will argue that Musar offers an innovative theory of self, deeply embedded in traditional society. Rabbi Salanter would not have said, do ritual any differently than the way he was doing it. Yet, introduces, articulates, and or perhaps anticipates a notion of autonomy that plants the seeds of a kind of secularism that later emerges in the neo-Musar movement in contemporary America. I use secular in a very narrow sense to refer to ways of constructing the self as an autonomous agent which can determine proper behavior, originally tied to, but not identical with traditional authority structures, particularly the active Torah study and the obligatory nature of halakha, of Jewish law. Secular here needn't deny God by definition, but it does incorporate competing, sometimes even alternative forms of agency in regards to human flourishing. The moment you decouple them, you have a choice. We all lament how much people favor ritual over development of an internal self, right? That's what Daniel was talking about in putting God second. It's exactly what he's talking about. The worry that you're going to decouple them and you're going to choose ritual. So the Musar movement started to decouple them and placed a premium on the inner self. And of course, today you find circles of people who are not interested in Jewish ritual at all, but who learn Musar. Entire institutes, because you're working on your internal self. So those are two approaches that we see in classical Jewish thinkers, which is to say that the authentic self and the performative self, the inside and the outside, are mutually reinforcing, and really the authenticity is what it's about, in a very particular way. It teaches you something very particular, and it comes from a very particular place. And clearly the inner self is what matters the most. And then there's the view that they can be decoupled, and they're on parallel tracks in some way, and they're both important, but we're going to focus our time on the inner self. Well, I'd like to do something countercultural, friends. I'd like to make a third move, which is what happens if for a moment we look at ritual not as the husk of authenticity. Decouple ritual and authenticity. Decouple your inner life and your outer life. Take the performance and put it in its own box, and I want to look at that performance and say that performance matters whether you're thinking about it or not. Countercultural, isn't it? Dangerous, fundamentalist. Just wait. Just wait. There are a few ways to do this. One way to do this is Yeshayahu Leibovitz way. Yeshayahu Leibovitz was a scientist who was interested in philosophy of Judaism per se. And he basically said, your insight doesn't matter. God says you do. That's it. That's one way. Another way is more mystical. Theurgy. You do it. It has some impact on God whether you think about it or not. You do it. It brings the Messiah closer whether you think about it or not. You do it. You're fulfilling God's command. I want to add a layer, which for some people is just another route, right? Because some people are like, wait, I cannot get on any of those tracks. I don't want to get on any of those tracks. Give me another track to at least look at. So I'm going to give you another track to look at from Seligman. And again, let's remind ourselves that when I'm talking about ritual, I'm talking about ritual as it means things differently to different people in the room. And there may be people sitting in this room who say, ritual is just not me. Well, if it's not you in the religious sense, it's probably you in other senses. So think about the rituals that you do. Whether it's joining your federation, whether it's being in a group that commemorates Yom HaShoah, whether it's singing Debbie Friedman songs, whether it's insisting on people taking off their shoes at the door. Everyone does ritual. I'm talking about it in a very particular way because when I think about what is a Jew, I'm interested in this particular dimension of ritual performance because I'm fascinated by how all Jewish denominations have kept ritual in different ways. We can't get rid of it. You try, you can't get rid of it. It comes back. It pops back up. And I'm curious about it. I'm curious about what the power of it is. And so our countercultural journey begins in the Talmud. It begins in two sugyot, two passages in the Babylonian Talmud that discuss the question of kavanah, of intention, when performing ritual. One example, one sugya, is talking about the recitation of the Shema. It's talking about something where you're actually saying words that mean something. Right? Similar to the conversation of what are you saying? If someone recites Kiddush, what are they saying? And are they okay with the words that they're saying? Well, I don't understand it anyway. You're saying real words. And what do these words actually mean? The second example is going to be one that is actually, seems at least on the face of it, to be more about action than speech. And that is the blowing of the shofar, the hearing the shofar. And we're going to look at the way the Talmud treats these two. And I want us to get curious. I want us to be surprised. I don't want to make assumptions. I want to read with open eyes. So let's read. Number 5. Babylonian Talmud Brachot. The Mishnah says, if one was reading the section of the Torah containing the Shema, in other words, things that happen every day. I'm sitting with a $50,000 Torah scroll at this table. I happen to, that's my high maintenance. When I read the Torah, I want to read it from a real Torah scroll. So I'm reading from a Torah scroll, and I'm in the portion of the Torah where the Shema is found. And you know what? It's actually time to recite Shema. Now this worries me, because the time to recite Shema is very early in the morning. What time have I been up since? But I've been up. Or perhaps it's getting late. Why am I still reading? So if one had intention, the Mishnah says, one fulfills the commandment to recite the Shema. So I'm reading the words a minute ago for edification, for study, maybe to fix the scroll, because I'm just checking that everything is in order. And then a second later, I'm doing it for performance. And you know what makes the difference, whether this is a religious performance or not? My intention, right? That's what it looks like. Until you get to the Talmud. And the Gemara, the Talmud says, you know what? From the ruling of the Mishnah, we extrapolate that commandments require intention. Sounds like intention is like a key factor. No. You're mistaken. What does if one had intention mean? Intention to read. What? So I have to have intention to be reading? But what do you mean? But the person is already reading. Intention to read. Even if it's intention to read out loud, which we don't see any evidence that that's what it is necessarily. But it's intention to read. Oh, no. This is the case of someone who was reading to repair the Torah scroll. So if I was reading to repair the Torah scroll, I might have been reading like ma, yes. Checking it against something perhaps, but not reading it in some sort of continuous fashion. So I'm not really reading it. So the intention here, let's just make clear, the intention here is not about like, what am I saying? The intention is not that I'm performing a commandment or that I'm performing a religious action. The intention is that I'm reading, right? The intention is that I'm reading. The rabbis taught, and this is where the rabbis take a look at the first paragraph of the Shema and read the first paragraph of the Shema that describes, and these words should be on your heart, and you should talk about them when you sit and when you walk and when you sleep and when you get up and with your children. Read these words about the Shema as actually talking about the Shema itself, talking about the actual ritual of recitation of Shema. So here goes, and they shall be. Means that you should not recite the Shema in reverse order. They shall be what they are. Read it in the right order. These words on your heart. Here we go. And these words shall be on your heart. Part of the first paragraph of the Shema. Vayu advarim ha'ila al levavecha. Al levavcha, excuse me. Okay? Vayu advarim ha'ila asher anochi mitzavcha hayom. Al levavcha. Shema Yisrael. Okay, we're good? The second verse, right? Pardon? That was sincere. But I want you to see, that was sincere, but in order to get it, I had to do it. That was sincere. When I actually said the Shema, I actually kept in mind to accept God as my sovereign. That is what I did. And these words should be on your heart. Perhaps the entire section requires intention. Meaning these words that you're about to recite in the Shema should be on your heart. They require intention. Therefore, the verse specifies these words on your heart to stipulate that only up to this phrase requires intention. Stop there. But beyond this, intention is not required. What? I'm going to recite the Shema as Chris just asked me, and I'm only going to have intention for the first 3 verses, and then I'm going to say 2.5 more paragraphs and not think a blessed thing? Why? What is that even? Rabbi Akiva said to him, no, but the verses also stipulate that which I command you today. Asher anochi mitzavcha hayom. Meaning all of it, everything that's in this paragraph. Because the 3 paragraphs of the Shema, of course, they can't be found in one place because we're very complicated people. Suggesting that the entire section requires intention. That's going to be the argument. Does the first verse require intention? Do the first 3 verses require intention? Does the first paragraph require intention? What about paragraph 2 and 3? How could you say something and not be thinking about it at all? But at least the first paragraph has intention. And perhaps, or maybe the first line, or maybe the first 2 lines. And the Gemara goes on, the Talmud goes on to have the conversation about, okay, so what are you supposed to think about in that first line, that first Shema? How is that first Shema? What is it supposed to represent of your authentic self, of what's going on inside? But we're ignoring the fact that there's a whole section and a half that doesn't represent anything inside, necessarily. And it gets better when you talk about actual performance as opposed to words. Number 6, the Talmud in Rosh Hashanah. You know, I want you all to know something. That's the first time I've ever laned the Torah in a mixed audience in my life. Wow. Okay. Shalchu le'lavu ad Shmuel. They sent to Samuel's father. In the English, a person who was forced to eat matzah. How many people here have ever eaten matzah and felt like it was truly volitional? I love shmura matzah, the round. I love that stuff. But most people in the world. But no, here we're talking somebody who was like really forced to eat matzah. What I'm trying to say in terms of the fact that I just laned for the first time in front of a mixed audience is that was like a comet. Like it'll be another 77 years before you see that again. Before I do that again. Wow, I can't wait to talk about this with myself. And with the videographer. A lot of sincere self happening up here. They sent to Samuel's father. A person who was forced to eat matzah has fulfilled their obligation. What? Why? Egypt, slavery, redemption, Exodus, liberty, liberation. Someone's going to stuff a matzah in your mouth, that's good enough? Who forced them? If you suggest that a demon forced them, maybe an inner demon, do we not learn in a Braita, an early rabbinic source, that one who is sometimes ranting and at other times lucid, that is, you have your inner demons that are in control of you versus the time where it seems like you're in control, cannot fulfill their obligation when they're ranting? So it can't be that sort of, someone was sort of having an episode. Rav Ashi said the Parsim, the Persians, forced you to eat. You know those Persians, they love when their Jews eat matzah. Rava extrapolated that this must mean, if you can be forced to eat matzah and it counts, this must mean that one who blows shofar for musical purposes also thereby fulfills the obligation to hear the shofar. Isn't that obvious? They're both ritual. One might have thought that because the Torah simply says eat matzah, just eating it is enough. Whereas the Torah describes blowing shofar as a remembrance blast. A person just fiddling around on a shofar could not fulfill their obligation. Meaning there are these and there are these. There are some rituals that you need to be present for, and there are other rituals for where the performance is good enough. But now we see that clearly they can. Clearly, Rava believes that fulfilling commandments does not require intention. The Talmud continues with an argument over whether actually mitzvot, actual ritual performance requires intention or not. Mitzvot tzrichot kavanah, do they require intention or do they not? Mitzvot ein tzrichot kavanah. And 3 things about these texts fascinate me. And of course, I brought you a nice medieval commentator who's going to say to you, well, sometimes you need this and sometimes you need that. And obviously, there are even 2 different types of intention. Maybe the intention you have in Shema is actually understanding what you're saying, whereas the intention you have in the shofar is that you're doing a ritual act. But there are 3 things that fascinate me here. Number 1, this is totally unenforceable. The idea of intention is totally unenforceable. So I tell you to eat your vegetables. Do I know if you like eating your vegetables? So I tell you to blow a shofar. Do I know what you're thinking? I tell you to come and hear a shofar. Do I know what that means to you? I don't know what your kavanah is, or if there's any intention whatsoever. You ever sit with someone and you're in a meeting and they look like they're paying attention to you, but they're actually so deep in thought about something else? And then you say, oh my gosh, so you're right with me. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, were you? That's this. That's this. I'm a jazz musician who's blowing a shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Good, did it. Really? But nobody even knows. It doesn't matter. Maybe I'm a jazz musician who's blowing it exactly the way they blow it in temple, and people think that that's what it is, right? So it's unenforceable. Number two, I'm fascinated by the idea of mitzvot ein tzrichot kavanah, to suggest that a mitzvah doesn't require internal intention. Now, I think for the rabbis, what that means, it's because God said it, so do it, right? But I think there's more sociologically that we can learn from that, and we'll get there. And the third is, I'm bothered by the degree to which kavanah has any definition here. So kavanah is either, I understand the words, if there are words, or if it's a performance, I understand that it is a Jewish ritual. Has anybody here ever heard the shofar? Or am I supposed to assume everybody did? Is that what I'm assuming from this? Because there may be a person in this room who has not, so that's why I'm asking you to raise your hand, okay? Does it sound like a cry to you? Raise your hand if it sounds like a cry to you, like a sad. Raise your hand if it sounds triumphant. Raise your hand if it sounds like an alarm clock. Raise your hand if it sounds like the end of the day bell from when you were a kid. Raise your hand if it sounds like the siren that you heard when you had to run into a bomb shelter once. Raise your hand if it sounds like your baby crying. My baby cries real loud. There's nothing of that here. You know what's unenforceable? That's really unenforceable. You can try to tell me I'm going to think of it as a Jewish ritual, but you can't tell me what that ritual means to me at all. That's the power of ritual. The power of ritual is that it's ambiguous. The power of ritual is that it's a performance out in the public sphere, and nobody knows what it means. And nobody owns what it means. I don't own what it means. You don't own what it means. It's more ambiguous than that. I don't actually know if it's real. I'm standing in front of a kotel and imagining myself in a certain way. I don't know if that's real. I'm standing in prayer and imagining myself before God. I think that's real. I don't know that that's real. I'm imagining myself as someone who left Egypt. We're inhabiting these spaces. We don't know if they're real. We don't know if they're efficacious. Sometimes we do a ritual and we don't even know what we think about it. I know why I'm doing this. This is what I do. So I don't know. Do you know that every time we're in a meeting, you click your foot 3 times towards the end of the meeting? Why do you do that? I don't know. It's what I do. It's what I do. It gives me something. I don't know what it gives me. Ritual is inherently ambiguous. Catherine Bell, religious studies scholar. Number 8. With some consistency, ambiguity has been systematically identified as an important aspect of ritual. Lewis, for example, argues that ritual may emphasize the ambiguity or incoherence of symbols in order to invite speculation or a perception of a mystery that seems to come within grasp. Right? I'm going back to that family who saw my father-in-law, as they thought, walk into the burial plot and said, wow, that seems so powerful. We want to do that. It seems powerful, right? It seems powerful. David Jordan and Fernandez independently explored the ways in which ritual symbols are inherently ambiguous, thereby affording the diverse and non-falsifiable interpretations they find necessary to the maintenance of community. Oh, ritual can mean anything, so it can mean anything. So we can all do it, and it can mean anything. I used to have a teacher in 10th grade, 11th grade, who used to say, this piece of Mark Twain cannot be about a penguin's debutante ball. Literature cannot be just about anything. Ritual can be about anything, is the suggestion. But there's some truth to it. This is my third way, my countercultural way. I do not want to argue at the moment that ritual is about creating an authentic self or about expressing an authentic self. I do not want to argue that ritual and the sincere self are on separate tracks, and I'd like to prefer the sincere self. I'd like to focus on the ritual self as of value, in and of itself for a moment. Adam Seligman, remember he said there were 4 things he was going to say in the book? So here's the 4th. The 4th he says in the book is he says ritual should be. Doesn't mean it is. It should be because of its ambiguity, because of the fact that nobody owns it and nobody owns the interpretation of it. It should be a bulwark against fundamentalism. Wow. And I'm gonna unpack it. Ritual should be a defense against fundamentalism. And I'm going to explain why. And this is exactly what I come here to tell you today. We have perverted ritual to become about fundamentalism. We have perverted ritual to become about identity politics. We have perverted ritual to be about boundaries. Ritual is about a lot of things. I think ritual is about God. I think ritual is about peoplehood. I think ritual is about tradition. I think ritual is about a lot of things. But I think ritual is also about ambiguity and about not being so sure and about doubt and about not defining everything to the last jot and tittle. Adam Seligman shows us this, suggests that a great example for this is the I love you phenomenon. I love you phenomenon. And now I'm very sensitive to the fact that people have different experiences in life. So he's going to use I love you, but you can substitute for I love you any human relationship. Okay? In number 9, we can accumulate great quantities of discourse, but never dispel the suspicion, even within our own minds, that it is all just artifice. The Calvinists' "Am I really saved?" and the teenagers' "Am I really in love?" are at heart similar kinds of questions. After 3 decades of marriage, kids, laundry, mortgages, funerals, fights, and in-laws, I actually thought those 2 were superfluous synonyms. Not with mine, I love my in-laws. The relationship tends to be sustained by a shared as if, rather than a continued as is. Let's skip a bit, or one line. Relationships that fail to construct a shared subjunctive over the long term tend to fall apart. Let's go down from there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 more lines to the word thus. Thus, for example, we can in the end distinguish 2 forms of the words I love you. The emotionally wrought confession by the starstruck young youth appeals to the sincere mode. Of course, like all language of sincerity, we have doubts. Perhaps they're just trying to get their partner into bed. Or perhaps they are indeed sincere. And having established the as-is of this love, will never feel the need to say the words again. Good luck. Even through decades of marriage. This person may also fail to say those words ever again because that person may not sincerely experience the same kind of love as when they first fell in love. On the other hand, we also have the ritual I love you, whose performative aspect is more important than its denotative function. This is why one can repeat it for years and years to the same person. In so doing, one is not adding any bit of hitherto unknown information, but instead acting out a ritual, rather in the manner of a prayer. In the continual search to renew the authentic sources of sincerity, there is little room for ambiguity. All ambivalence and ambiguity threatens the attempt to arrive at the true self. That true self can, of course, be very different in different times and historical periods, but in each case, sincerity tries to resolve all ambiguity to forge a pure and unsullied consciousness. When my husband says, I love you to me at the end of a phone call, I don't say, really, can you explain to me why and how you're feeling that? Because you know what? He may not be feeling it at that moment. He may not be feeling it the way he first said, I love you. He may not be feeling it the way that he said, I love you to me when we weren't in a fight. And when he takes out the garbage, I don't say to him, no, that's too gendered. When I take out the garbage, how come all my gender examples end up with women doing the annoying things? This is not good. When I take out the garbage, let's say, okay, he doesn't say to me, oh, Elana, are you doing that because you care? And that, actually, I'm doing that because it smells and I want to get rid of it. But he thinks I'm doing it because I'm helping him. And you know what? That ambiguity is good. That ambiguity is healthy. If the only way we can participate in something is if we are feeling it at that exact moment, at that exact thing, well, then we're never going to lose those 10 pounds. You understand? If the only way I can be in synagogue with you is if we understand the ritual the same way, well, then I'm not going to be able to be in synagogue with anybody except for the people who understand the ritual in the exact same way as I do. The significance of ambiguity in ritual is the opposite of what we've done to it. It's the opposite. It's supposed to be about uncertainty. I don't know if this works. I don't know what it means. I don't know if we're doing the same thing for the same reason, but we're doing the same thing. You know, somebody told me they were in Safed, they were in Tzfat, and heard a bunch of Hasidim singing Debbie Friedman's Havdalah. It's the same ritual, folks. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. And when somebody sings it who knew Debbie Friedman, and when somebody sings it who didn't, they're singing it for different reasons in different ways. But they share it. There's something about the ability to live in community. It's not about finding the exact people who think the exact same way as you and live in community, because you know what that then becomes? It becomes a witch hunt. Do you believe like us? Can you be here? Do you still believe like? It seems like you're changing a bit. We're not sure you belong here. You know how tiring authenticity can be? You know how erratic authenticity can be? You'd never lose those 10 pounds. You'd never stay in that relationship. You'd never stay in that job. Couldn't be. So I'd like to put the focus on the ambiguity of ritual instead of the fundamentalism of ritual. People worry about ritual without sincerity or with excessive sincerity because it's fundamentalism. I want to suggest that there's something pedagogical about ritual, regardless of the ritual itself, that it has to teach the autonomous human being, which is if the move towards the authentic self in the Enlightenment was a corrective for the extensive subjugation of the authentic self before that, ritual in some ways can be a corrective to excessive authenticity, which becomes fundamentalism on the right or on the left. But it can, again, if the move away from ritual in the Enlightenment period, or supposed move away from ritual, because rituals just took on new forms. If the move away from ritual in the Enlightenment period was about reclaiming the individual, because the individual had been so just ignored, So it was a corrective. The ritual, says Seligman, today, if we think about it in the right way, if we consider it, it's very much dependent on our orientation towards it, can be a corrective to excessive authenticity. A corrective to thinking I need to own the truth. I need to own meaning. I need to be in this 100%. I'm not allowed to have any ambiguity. I'm not allowed to have any misgivings about what I'm doing. I mean, isn't this our I Engage curriculum? The troubled committed? We say, welcome to the ritual of Zionism. It's complicated. Nobody's asking you to be all in all the time. If you're never in, this is the wrong ritual for you. That's clear, obviously. Right? Let's not be silly. But there's something here. There's something here if we take it, if we grab it. What that ambiguity can do is it can open up two opportunities. And with this, I'm going to end. The first opportunity it can open up is it can open up the opportunity for the sincere self to interact with ritual again, for the authentic self to interact with ritual again, but not in a prescribed fashion. Not the ritual means this, and we're going to tell you what it means. Have you ever looked in the Siddur on Rosh Hashanah when you're hearing that shofar? You know, some prayer books say, while you're hearing the shofar, you should have this, in mind. Well, really? You should think of it as a cry, and you should think of it as a shout, and you should think of it as an alarm. Well, if I'm having all of those in mind, I'm actually probably having none of those in mind. Or I'm certainly not having like real authenticity there. But if the whole idea is that the performance is ambiguous, it's open. Paint on that canvas. It's open. Paint in different colors on that canvas on different days. Means different things. The people sitting in this room, did you come to Hartman because, you felt like your rabbi asked you, so you had to come? Did you come to Hartman because this is the best Torah you ever learn? Did you come to Hartman because you like sitting under this blazing sun? Like what brought you here? Did you come to Hartman because you knew Rabbi David Hartman and that's something for you? Did you come to Hartman because you're married to Danielle's daughter? Like, why'd you come to Hartman? You all came for different reasons. That's the beauty of it. Invest it with that instead of it being this prescriptive piece. By the way, not that I'm against prescription, but it doesn't mean everybody has to be pro-prescription. Rabbi Joseph Dov Soloveitchik of blessed memory, he had a piece of this in an interesting way. He said, you know what bugs me? People are trying to find the history behind a ritual. How did that ritual evolve? What was the original context of that ritual? He says, that's kind of deadening, the way Sharon told us the other night. It's kind of deadening. So Rabbi Soloveitchik says, I actually would rather you be constructive about ritual. And you can only be constructive about ritual if the performance itself has significance in and of itself, regardless of what you're going to think of it, right? Because how can you be constructive and you be constructive and you be constructive and it all works? It has to be because the performance itself matters. So he says in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up from the bottom of this first English paragraph in number 10. Unfortunately, while neither the mathematician nor physicists are troubled by the history of their disciplines, the philosopher of religion is still a slave to genetics. What's the genealogy of this ritual? In contrast with genetic methodology, a philosophy of religion following a retrospective procedure from the objective to the subjective realm does not eliminate its own object. The method of reconstruction yields more than relationship explanatory exposition. It offers a multidimensional religious outlook to the homo religiosus, to the religious person. And he proceeds to cite Maimonides, explaining that he thinks of the shofar as an alarm clock. He says, the great Maimonides, who told us about an hour ago that the commandments were supposed to teach us certain opinions and certain morals. The great Maimonides realizes that there's still a lot of space in there. And he says, well, it's an alarm clock, I think, to remind us to do tshuva, to repent. It's an alarm clock. He says it's a remez. That's a hint. That's what I think it means. And he does the same thing with purity and impurity. He says it's not dirt. It's a reminder that just as you can purify your body, you can purify your soul. Does he know? No, he doesn't know, and he doesn't pretend to know because he calls it a remez. He calls it a hint. Here's my hint. This is what I think of it. This is what I invest in it. So one thing that this view of performance makes possible is living in community. Another view of what this performance makes possible is relationship. Whether it's relationship to your diet or relationship, lahavdil, to distinguish, to God, or anything else. Whether you're feeling it some days or you're not feeling it. You're committed to it in some way. A third thing that it makes possible is it makes possible a joyous smorgasbord of explanations of what it means. It's there for the taking. We're going to spend Shabbat together. We're going to sit at a meal. What does it mean to you? You're going to hear Birkat HaMazon, grace after meals, which for some people, that's not part of their ritual at all. So sitting there watching or listening, what does that mean to you? What does the act of witnessing it mean to you? The people who are saying it, what does it mean to you? Does it remind you of your camp days? Are you thinking about God? Are you trying to remember the words? Like what's going on there? But the second thing that it makes possible is that there's something about authenticity that goes like this and sits and evaluates. And there's something about ritual that jumps in, that just jumps right in. And there's power to that experience. Robert Orsi, the chair of Catholic Studies at Northwestern, puts it really beautifully. He's describing when one of his Italian Catholic grandmothers went to see a statue of Mary at the Met in New York. On line 5, she climbs the museum's steep steps, rising up from Fifth Avenue, and pushes through the crowds and into the rooms of medieval art, where there are many lovely statues of the Blessed Mother, whom my grandmother knows and loves. My grandmother wants to touch the statues. She wants to lean across the velvet ropes to kiss their sculpted robes, or to whisper her secrets and needs. But this is not how modern people approach art. For them, the statues are representations, illustrative of a particular moment of Western history and the history of Western art. I might offer a mere husk of something more essential, which is the history, the information, and are to be admired for their form and their contribution to the development of aesthetic styles over time. There's nothing in them, no one there. The guards rush over and send my grandmother back out to the street. This is a parable of two ways of being in the world. One associated with the modern, although it's complicated, clearly, since my grandmother's lived in the modern world after all. And you can find believers in cathedrals throughout the world today petitioning statues. The other with something different from the modern. One is oriented towards presence in things, the other towards absence. As the guard rushing over shows, the difference is carefully policed. Certain ways of being in the modern world, certain ways of imagining it are tolerable, and others are not. Especially intolerable are ways of being and imagining oriented to the divine presence. Thank you very much. We are open for questions, friends. Yes, sir, your name? Hi, Joel.
You can discuss one reason why people do ritual is, I don't know if it's out of fear or habit. For example, the rush to kissing the
For example, what?
they'll kiss them as there's a...
Okay.
Or even to say, I love you, if you don't feel something's amiss. I don't know how to explain that.
So you want to talk about the role of fear in ritual?
Well, I think a lot of people do ritual because they feel if they don't, something will happen.
I think you're right that a lot of people do. To me, that's just one of the many meanings that people have when they do ritual. I don't know if that is I'm not trying to downplay